Hello guys, welcome to the abridged version of The Sovereign Self, episode 4. So in this episode, I talked about the psychological significance of pain and how to master it. And pain is a very fundamental part of the human experience. We have all had it. We are probably experiencing it now, and we will always continue experiencing because life is unpredictable and scary and difficult. And there's physical pain and there's psychological pain, and I'm going to delve into the states of psychological pain because that's something that is probably the driving force behind the inability of people to become self-sufficient and independent, self-ruling, and able to exist happily in solitude, which was kind of the previous episode. So if you have trouble being alone, and especially if you think back through your life and you try to tell your narrative and you find areas that still make you upset, that is probably has to do with psychological suffering. Now, pain is probably the strongest of all motivators of human behavior, because we always try to avoid pain much more than we try to gain something that makes us feel good. That's just evolutionary psychology. And the thing is that unmanaged pain will make you sick, right? So it will manifest as illness, it will manifest as horrible relationships or behaviors or dependencies. It will make others sick, and it will make you see more pain and suffering in the world. So it's not something to be taken lightly. And most people don't talk about it because as soon as you acknowledge it, it makes it that much more real and makes you responsible for doing something about it. So my theory is that the root of every destructive and self-destructive behavior kind of comes from some form of pain and psychological pain. So let's look into what that looks like. So we have some very foundational elements of what pain is. So you can have the pain of regret, or disappointment, or shame, or betrayal, or anger, or fear, or grief, or loss. These are very, very foundational emotions that are combining and are very hard to recognize, because what happens is that they manifest themselves in multiple forms as they kind of interconnect and as they build their way through your memory and through your mind. What does that mean? Well, for instance, if you're feeling shame and you're feeling some form of betrayal, then you're probably going to have some form of guilt or resentment. If you're feeling anger and you're feeling disappointment, you're probably going to have some form of hate or unfairness. So if you can see, these more complex behaviors start building on combinations of these very foundational, painful emotions. But there's a very finite number of them that starts creating multiple instances of itself. Right. So yeah, like unfairness, hate, abandonment, loneliness, guilt, resentment, and jealousy are the next level up in that hierarchy of behaviors that come from foundational pain. And they, in their turn, end up combining into more complex stuff like dependencies and obsessions and addictions and depression and anxiety, and self-doubt and self-hate, self-harm. Mistrust, disassociation, hopelessness. These are more complex behaviors that you probably start recognizing a little bit more, and they're easier to see in people, but ones that people tend to be blamed for directly. It's like you're obsessed, you're dependent, you're addicted, you're mistrustful, you're distant. Like this is something that people assign at this level to other people as criticisms, and they expect them to fix it at that level. Stop being anxious. Stop lying, stop being dependent, stop obsessing over this. But it's not that simple, right? Until you can figure out what is that breakdown to the fundamental problem and the source of the pain that's causing these behaviors. And what's more complicated, they can even go further, right? So even that level isn't what people tend to demonstrate. It takes, quite a bit of therapy time to get into that type of problem. So where they manifest themselves as insecurities and judgmentalism and cruelty, impulsivity, convictions, meaning like bad convictions, like obsession with an idea, hateful ideas, terrorism, like all these horrible things. Greed, deceit, lack of attachment. There's many different manifestations of this very complex hierarchy of a relatively finite number of painful emotions. So why is it important to recognize that is that these are behavioral patterns that you will observe in yourself and in others. And recognizing how they work builds compassion. First of all, recognizing that people do things not because they're horrible people, but because they're hurting or because you're hurting. And you're probably doing the same thing. Like, you're actually not a horrible person because you lied to somebody, or because you lied to yourself, or because you think that, you're not worth it or somebody else isn't worth it. It's because there's this underlying complexity leading to some form of pain or trauma. And mastering that builds, first of all, the capacity for unconditional love, and it builds the capacity for compassion. But not mastering it creates this huge risk of either complete disassociation or dependency, because the feeling of love is probably the best cure we have for sadness and for pain. And if this is how you choose to protect yourself from pain, you will risk becoming dependent on it. You can form dependent relationships on your parents, on your significant other, on your friends, on an idol, on anybody that helps you get away from your suffering, or you can choose to not do that and distance yourself and miss out on genuine relationships. And this is all, again, fundamentally linked to the idea of pain. Now, the problem with pain is that it can't be avoided, right? You will have it no matter what. Life is going to be bad. Life is going to be tough. It probably has been bad and tough, and it is just what it is. But if you can master it, and you can learn how to deal with it and recognize it and see how it works, you can become resilient to these challenges of life and really be able to recognize the world for what it is, not just for the pain that you're enduring and how it affects your life. So that's actually an idea I borrowed from martial arts, that, if you work out your body and you cause it limited and controlled pain and understand how that pain works, so you can eventually build yourself up to be resilient and tough and be able to circumvent it and accomplish it, and it won't even bother you. You'll actually figure out how to live with it properly. So I've come up with 12 steps how to master pain. So the first step is to take responsibility for it and saying that it's nobody but my own to deal with. And while it's totally great and okay to go get help, you can't blame anybody else for it, right? It is your job alone to deal with it. Then as soon as you come to that conclusion, you have to name it at its source. You have to work through this hierarchy of manifestations and understand what is it that you are: angry or guilty or fearful, or betrayed, and understand how this affects your behaviors and how it affects your thoughts and memories. Then you have to acknowledge it for what it is and let that acknowledgement sink in, because it takes a while to understand. After that, let yourself experience it. That's kind of the fourth step. See it for what it is, feel it for what it is, let your mind become familiar with its existence. Understand that you're in pain of some kind of suffering, and it is what it is, and you just have to endure it. And by enduring it, you prove to yourself that you can survive it. And you don't pass that blame on to others. This is your load to bear. A sixth step is that as you're enduring it, you have to observe it and learn from its patterns what makes it worse. So recognize it. At the seventh step, you have to find a weakness based on those patterns. Do something nice that helps you feel better, just one thing. And then recognize that as soon as you do that, you are going to get this horrible backlash while your brain reprograms itself to recognize that, it can be in control of things, where you'll be doubtful and the pain will come back in a much greater extent. And there's going to be this period of chaos and instability in your mind. And you just have to wait through that while your brain adjusts, and it will take a while. And then you have to fight it, right? You have to do little things that make you feel better, avoid the things that make you feel worse, and over time conquer it. And as you do, you have to reward yourself for these victories that you're going to make, small or big, so that you learn that the process of conquering suffering and pain isn't brutal, but can be actually pleasant. And at the end, you have to make yourself your own hero and be able to be kind to yourself for doing that. And then over time, learn how to be kind to others for going through that. And if you can learn how to manage your suffering, it will make you independent of others. It'll make you invulnerable, because it will allow you to love others unconditionally and separate your pain and their pain from your other parts of existence, and not get triggered by the behaviors that come from these foundational parts of pain that just are part of the world. And over time, you learn how to notice and be compassionate to that in others. You won't respond to them as emotionally. You will have much more peace and clarity, and really find that the purpose of pain is to allow you to control what the worst parts of your life are and will be, and convert them into something that has meaning, and break the hold that they have on you, break the hold of suffering and pain on your life, and really become the master of yourself and of your own life and of your own fate and of your own relationships, and do so from a place of happiness and pride and goodness, as opposed to fear and anger and obsession. So that's the end of my summary. Thank you very much for listening, guys, and I'll see you next week. Check out the full episode if you want to hear the full rant. This one's been kind of interesting. I like it. Bye-bye.